You have 10 seconds to prove you belong in this room. Or you can walk out with the rest of the people who don't understand what they're looking at." The words echoed through the glass walls of Hawthorne Dynamics' executive conference room. 30 people sat around the polished black table, watching a man in a faded work jacket stand alone beneath the cold white lights. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit. He wasn't carrying a leather briefcase. He didn't have an assistant whispering numbers into his ear. He was just Caleb Whitmore, a single father, a maintenance contractor, a man most people in that room had walked past 100 times without ever wondering about his story. But that morning, the most powerful people in the company were about to learn something they never expected. The quiet man holding the worn instruction manual was the reason their entire empire existed. Outside the 32nd floor window, the city moved without mercy. Cars flowed through the streets below, people chased deadlines, and millions of lives continued without knowing that a single decision inside this room could change everything. At the center of it all stood Vivian Hawthorne, CEO, billionaire, the woman who built Hawthorne Dynamics into one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked toward the presentation screen. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said calmly, "today we finalize the future of our company." Applause filled the room. Caleb stayed silent. His eyes weren't on the investors. They weren't on the cameras. They were fixed on the system model displayed behind Vivian. Something was wrong. Something only he could see. Because years ago, before anyone in this room knew his name, before the company became famous, before the world called Vivian Hawthorne a genius, Caleb Whitmore had built the foundation they were standing on. "Ms. Hawthorne," Caleb finally said. The applause disappeared. Every head turned. Vivian slowly looked at him. For a moment, she seemed confused that he had spoken at all. "Yes." Caleb stepped forward carefully. "The update you're about to approve has a failure point." A few executives exchanged amused looks. One man near the end of the table laughed quietly. The maintenance worker was questioning the CEO. Vivian folded her arms. "A failure point?" Caleb nodded. 72 hours after launch, the system will begin corrupting its own learning data. The room became uncomfortable, not because they believed him, because they couldn't understand why he was there. Vivian gave a small smile. "Caleb, I appreciate your concern." She walked closer. But this project was reviewed by engineers with decades of experience. Her eyes moved to his faded jacket. "You fix equipment in our building." A pause. "You don't design technology." The words were polite, but they carried the weight of humiliation. The room became quiet. Caleb felt every person waiting for him to become angry, to defend himself, to raise his voice. But he didn't. He had learned a long time ago that dignity didn't need permission from anyone. Vivian picked up the manual sitting beside the presentation computer and slid it across the table. "If you believe you understand this system better than the people who created it," she pushed it toward him. "Read the manual, moron." A few people looked away. A few smiled. Caleb looked down at the book. The same manual everyone trusted. The same manual everyone thought proved he was wrong. He placed his hand on the cover. Slowly, quietly, he opened it. The room waited for him to fail. But when Caleb turned the manual around, the laughter vanished. Because printed beneath the title page was a name. Not Vivian Hawthorne. Not Hawthorne Dynamics. A name that had been erased from company history for years. Created and designed by Caleb Whitmore. And for the first time that morning, the entire room had nothing left to say. The room had gone silent. But Caleb Whitmore had spent years living inside a silence far deeper than this one. It was the silence of empty dinner tables. The silence of a small house after a child fell asleep. The silence of being forgotten by people who once knew exactly what he had built. And somehow, that silence had never broken him. It had shaped him. Because before Caleb Whitmore became the man standing in a billionaire's conference room, he was simply a father trying to make sure his daughter never felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. Every morning began the same way. At 5:15 a.m., before the sun reached the small neighborhood outside the city, Caleb was already awake. The old kitchen light flickered above him as he packed a lunch into a small pink container with a faded cartoon sticker on the lid. "Daddy, you're putting too many strawberries again." A small voice came from the doorway. Caleb looked over his shoulder and smiled. His daughter, Lily Whitmore, stood there in oversized pajamas, her hair messy from sleep. "You said strawberries make bad mornings better." I said 3 strawberries. Caleb looked down at the container. There were 7. A quiet laugh escaped him. Then I guess today is a very bad morning. Lily rolled her eyes, but she smiled. For a few seconds, the world was simple. No executives. No billion-dollar companies. No stolen credit. Just a father and his daughter sharing a small moment before another difficult day began. Because that was the thing about Caleb. He had once lived in rooms where people waited for his ideas. Now he lived in rooms where people barely noticed he entered. And somehow, he preferred the second one. Years earlier, Caleb Whitmore had been the youngest engineer ever hired to lead Hawthorne Dynamics' most ambitious project. He was not famous. He did not chase attention. He simply solved problems that other people thought were impossible. But genius often comes with a cost. And Caleb learned that the world was quick to celebrate your talent when it made them money. But when life became complicated, people remembered your mistakes faster than your sacrifices. After his wife passed away, Caleb made a choice. He walked away. Not because he was defeated. Because Lily needed a father more than the world needed another invention. So he traded conference rooms for repair rooms. Business suits for work jackets. Recognition for quiet mornings. And he never regretted it. Not once. But inside Hawthorne Dynamics, the story everyone knew was different. The company believed the brilliant creator behind their revolutionary system was someone else. A carefully polished executive. A name printed in magazines. A person who stood beneath bright lights and accepted applause. Not a single father who fixed broken machines in the basement. That was why the expression on Vivian Hawthorne's face mattered so much. She wasn't angry anymore. She was confused. Her eyes remained locked on the manual. The room around her felt different now. The same people who laughed moments ago were suddenly avoiding eye contact. The same executives who ignored Caleb were now studying him like they had discovered a stranger standing in front of them. Vivian slowly picked up the document. Her fingers moved across the page. Created and designed by, she stopped. The name was impossible, but it was there. Caleb Whitmore. The man she had just called a fool. The man she assumed had no place at the table. The man who had quietly watched her company build an empire using his forgotten work. Where did you get this? Vivian finally asked. Her voice was lower now. Caleb looked at the manual. I wrote it. A wave of whispers moved through the room. One executive shook his head. That's impossible. Caleb looked toward him. Not with anger. Not with pride. Just calm. Is it? The question was simple, but it carried something heavier. Truth. Vivian studied him carefully. For the first time that day, she wasn't looking at his old jacket. She wasn't looking at his job title. She wasn't looking at what she assumed he was. She was looking at the person standing in front of her. And somewhere beneath the confidence of a CEO who had conquered industries, a small crack appeared. Because sometimes the hardest truth to accept is not that someone is smarter than you. It is realizing you never bothered to see them at all. Caleb closed the manual gently. I didn't come here for recognition. His voice remained quiet. I came because people were about to make a mistake that could hurt thousands of customers. The room stayed frozen. No one laughed. No one whispered. No one interrupted. And for the first time in years, Caleb Whitmore was finally being heard. The most dangerous mistake a person can make is believing they already know everything about someone they never took the time to understand. Vivian Hawthorne would remember those words for the rest of her life. Not because Caleb Whitmore said them loudly. He didn't. Not because he demanded an apology. He never did. But because he said them with the calm of a man who had nothing left to prove. The conference room remained frozen. The executives who once looked at Caleb as an inconvenience now watched him with uncertainty. A few stared at the manual. Others stared at Vivian. Because everyone in that room understood the same uncomfortable truth. The person they ignored was the person they needed. But truth has a strange way of exposing more than mistakes. It reveals character. And that was the moment Vivian began to realize that Caleb Whitmore was not just a forgotten engineer. He was a man who had chosen silence when he could have chosen revenge. The question was why? Why would someone who created the foundation of a billion-dollar company disappear? Why would a brilliant mind trade recognition for a simple life? Why would a man who could have owned the world choose to repair broken machines in a basement? The answer was hidden in a small house far away from the glass towers of Hawthorne Dynamics. A house where the lights were warm, where the walls carried memories, where a little girl waited every afternoon for her father to come home. Caleb had never measured success by the number of people who knew his name. He measured it by the person who called him dad. Years ago, before the world forgot him, Caleb sat in a different kind of room. A room filled with engineers, investors, and endless possibilities. He was young, brilliant, driven. His ideas moved faster than anyone could understand. The system that became Hawthorne Dynamics' greatest achievement started as a simple concept written in his old notebook. A way to make technology smarter. A way to make machines understand human needs. A way to solve problems before they became disasters. But behind every great invention is a human story. And Caleb's story changed the night he lost his wife. After that moment, success felt different. Awards felt empty. Applause sounded distant. Because every achievement meant nothing if he came home to a child wondering why her father was never there. So Caleb made a decision most people would never understand. He walked away. He gave up the spotlight. He gave up the promises of investors. He gave up the future everyone expected him to chase. Not because he lacked ambition, because he discovered something more important. Love. Quiet love. The kind that doesn't appear on magazine covers. The kind that wakes up early to pack lunches. The kind that stays awake through the night when a child has a fever. The kind that chooses responsibility over recognition. Back inside the conference room, Vivian slowly placed the manual on the table. Why didn't you tell anyone? Her voice had changed. The confidence was still there. But something else had appeared. Respect. Caleb looked toward the city outside the window. I tried. The room listened. Years ago, I tried to explain what happened. His expression remained steady. But people were more interested in protecting the company's image than finding the truth. A heavy silence followed, because everyone knew companies had histories. And sometimes, those histories were not as clean as the stories they told. Vivian looked at the pages again. There were signatures, original designs, technical notes, proof of a past that had been buried. This system, she whispered. Everything we built, Caleb nodded. It started with an idea. A pause. An idea that someone else decided to claim. The words were gentle, but they carried years of disappointment. Vivian felt something she rarely experienced. Regret. Not because Caleb was powerful, not because he was smarter, but because she realized she had judged a person based on what she saw on the outside. A simple jacket, a quiet voice, a forgotten position. She had mistaken humility for weakness, and that mistake was about to cost her more than pride. Because the problem Caleb warned them about was still waiting. The system was still scheduled to launch. The contract was still ready to be signed. And somewhere inside the code Caleb created years ago, a failure was counting down. The room had finally accepted who Caleb Whitmore was. But they had not yet understood what he had come there to prevent. The problem was never that the machine could fail. The problem was that nobody wanted to believe the man who knew why. Those words would soon become the difference between disaster and survival. Inside Hawthorne Dynamics, the clock continued moving. The contract was still waiting. The investors were still watching. And thousands of customers were still preparing to trust a system that Caleb Whitmore knew was not ready. The room had changed. Minutes earlier, Caleb was invisible. Now every person watched his every movement. But Caleb did not enjoy the attention. He never wanted it. He simply wanted to stop something he had seen coming long before anyone else. Vivian Hawthorne stood beside the conference table, the manual still open in front of her. Her fingers rested on the page containing Caleb's name. Tell me exactly what happens, she said. Her voice was quieter than before. Not the voice of a CEO giving orders. The voice of someone searching for the truth. Caleb looked at the screen displaying the final system model. The update changes the way the artificial intelligence processes customer behavior. He walked closer. The original design was built with a protection layer. It allowed the system to recognize unusual patterns before making decisions. He pointed toward the data stream. But someone removed that layer. A few executives exchanged nervous glances. One of them, Marcus Vale, the company's chief operating officer, immediately stepped forward. That's impossible. His voice cut through the room. The system has passed every internal review. Caleb looked at him. Internal reviews only find problems people are looking for. Marcus frowned. And you expect us to believe you? The question was sharp, accusing. The old Caleb might have answered differently. The younger version of himself might have fought to prove he was right. But life had taught him something important. Not every battle is won by speaking louder. Sometimes truth simply waits. Caleb turned back toward the screen. I don't need you to believe me. A pause. I need you to check. The simplicity of his answer unsettled everyone. Because confidence usually came with ego. But Caleb's confidence came from experience. Vivian watched him carefully. She had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Investors wanted profit. Executives wanted promotions. Partners wanted influence. But Caleb wanted nothing. He was standing there because he cared about people who would never even know his name. And that was something she had not expected. Show us, Vivian said. Caleb nodded. He moved toward the control panel. The room watched as the man everyone underestimated began navigating through the system with natural familiarity. Not like someone reading instructions. Like someone returning home. Every movement was precise. Every decision was calm. The executives slowly realized something uncomfortable. Caleb wasn't discovering the system. He was remembering it. The screens changed. Lines of code appeared. Old architecture. Original designs. Hidden files. Then Caleb stopped. There. The room leaned forward. A small section of the system appeared. A section nobody had noticed. A section that had been altered years ago. Vivian stepped closer. Who changed this? Caleb didn't answer immediately. Because sometimes the truth is heavier than people expect. His eyes moved across the screen. Then he said softly, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The air became colder. The company's biggest success was not failing because of an accident. It was failing because someone had changed the foundation. Someone had removed the very protection Caleb created. And now the question was no longer whether the system would fail. The question was, who wanted it to? Vivian looked around the room. For the first time, she wasn't seeing a group of talented executives. She was seeing a group of people who had missed the most important detail. The person they ignored was the only one who had been paying attention. Outside, rain began tapping against the glass windows of the tower. The city lights blurred through the storm. And inside that room, a forgotten engineer, a powerful CEO, and a hidden truth were finally standing together. But Caleb knew something they did not. Finding the mistake was the easy part. Finding the person responsible would change everything. Sometimes the person trying to save you is the same person you pushed away. The storm outside Hawthorne Dynamics continued to grow. Rain covered the glass walls of the tower, turning the city below into a blur of silver and shadows. Inside the conference room, nobody moved. Because the truth was no longer hidden. Someone had changed Caleb Whitmore's original design. Someone had removed the protection layer. And now the company's greatest achievement was standing on the edge of collapse. Vivian Hawthorne stared at the screen. The woman who built an empire from confidence and control suddenly found herself facing something she could not solve with money, influence, or authority. A mistake buried beneath years of success. And the only person who could fix it was the man she had insulted minutes earlier. Can you repair it? Vivian asked. The room waited. Caleb looked at the system. He looked at the code. He looked at the technology that had once been his dream. Then he looked back at the people who had forgotten him. I can. A breath of relief moved through the room. But Caleb continued. Not like this. The relief disappeared. Vivian stepped closer. What does that mean? It means this system was never designed to work the way it is running now. Caleb pointed toward the data structure. The original version protected people from the machine making decisions too quickly. Someone removed that balance. Marcus Vale immediately shook his head. That's speculation. Caleb turned toward him. No, his voice remained calm. That is evidence. The room became quiet again. Because Caleb was not defending his reputation. He was defending the truth. Marcus walked closer. You expect everyone here to believe a contractor over the entire engineering department? A few executives nodded. They wanted an easier answer. They wanted the problem to be simple. Because simple problems did not threaten careers. But Caleb understood something they did not. The hardest truths were often the ones people avoided the longest. I don't expect anyone to believe me, Caleb said. He looked around the room. I expect the system to prove itself. Then he opened another file. A hidden diagnostic report appeared on the screen. The timestamp was years old. The room watched as the information appeared. Original creator. Original architecture. Original safety protocols. Everything pointed back to one person. Caleb Whitmore. Vivian slowly looked at Marcus. Why was this removed? Marcus said nothing. And that silence spoke louder than any answer. Because silence can be many things. It can be fear. It can be guilt. It can be the moment someone realizes the truth has finally caught up. Caleb noticed the expression on Marcus's face. But he didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He didn't say, "I told you so." That was never who he was. The years had taken many things from Caleb. His position, his recognition, his place in the company he helped create. But they never took his dignity. Vivian looked at him differently now. Not as an employee, not as a stranger, but as someone who had carried a burden alone for far too long. "Caleb," she paused. The apology was almost there. But before she could finish, one of the executives interrupted. "We have a bigger problem." Everyone turned. The executive pointed at the countdown on the main display. The launch sequence had already begun. The system was preparing for activation. 24 hours earlier, the company believed they were celebrating success. Now they realized they were racing against failure. Caleb stepped toward the screen. "How much time?" The executive swallowed. 40 minutes. 40 minutes to stop a disaster. 40 minutes to prove the forgotten engineer was right. 40 minutes before thousands of customers would discover what happened when pride ignored wisdom. Vivian looked at Caleb. For the first time, there was no arrogance in her eyes. Only trust. "Tell me what you need." Caleb looked at the team, at the executives, at the people who once ignored him. Then he answered quietly, "I need everyone in this room to stop protecting their pride," a pause, "and start protecting the people who trusted us." No one spoke, because everyone understood. This was no longer about a company, no longer about credit, no longer about who was right. It was about doing the right thing. And as Caleb sat down beside the same people who had laughed at him earlier, the man nobody remembered became the only person everyone needed. The greatest test of a person's character is not how they act when they are respected, but how they act when they are finally given the power to prove everyone wrong. 40 minutes. That was all the time left. The countdown on the screen continued moving forward, each second carrying the weight of thousands of people who trusted Hawthorne Dynamics. The room that once felt like a celebration now felt like a battlefield. But there were no weapons, no shouting, only a group of people facing the consequences of choices they had made years ago. Caleb Whitmore sat in front of the system controls. The same technology he created, the same technology that almost destroyed his reputation. Yet his hands remained steady, because Caleb was not fighting for revenge. He was fighting for responsibility. "Start from the beginning," Vivian said. Caleb looked at her. "The beginning?" "Yes." Her voice softened. "Show me what was changed." For years, people had asked Caleb what he wanted. More money, more recognition, a better title. But nobody had ever asked him what happened. Not until now. Caleb opened the original architecture files. The screen filled with thousands of lines of data. This was the first version. He pointed. The system was designed to learn, but never without limits. He moved to another section. This protection layer allowed the system to pause when it encountered uncertain decisions. Vivian studied the screen, and someone removed it. Caleb nodded. Someone believed faster results were more valuable than safer results. The room became uncomfortable, because everyone understood what that meant. Somewhere along the way, ambition became more important than responsibility. Marcus Vale stepped forward again. "We don't know that anyone intentionally changed anything." Caleb looked at him. No, a pause. "We know someone did." The confidence in his voice stopped the room. Not because he was arrogant, because he was certain. Caleb opened another file. A security record appeared. A list of modifications, dates, access information, approval records. Vivian leaned closer. Her expression changed. Because the evidence was no longer theoretical. Someone had approved the changes. Someone inside the company. Someone with authority. The room filled with whispers. Marcus immediately looked away, and that small movement did not escape Vivian's attention. "Marcus," she said. The entire room froze. The chief operating officer slowly turned. "Yes." Vivian stared at him. "Did you know about this?" For the first time, Marcus looked uncertain. A powerful executive. A man who had spent years controlling conversations. Suddenly, he had no answer. Caleb watched quietly. He could have exposed him immediately. He could have humiliated him. He could have returned every painful moment from his own past. But he didn't, because Caleb understood something many people never learn. Justice is not about making someone suffer. Justice is about making the truth impossible to hide. "I think," Caleb said calmly, "we should focus on fixing the system first." Everyone looked at him, even Vivian, because she expected anger. She expected satisfaction. Instead, she saw grace. The same grace that made him leave fame behind. The same grace that made him raise his daughter alone. The same grace that allowed him to save people who had forgotten him. Vivian looked back at the countdown. 25 minutes remained. The pressure was growing. The system was becoming unstable. Caleb began typing. The room watched. The man they once ignored was now leading the entire operation. Every command, every adjustment, every decision. It was like watching someone return to a place they never truly left. Then suddenly, the screen changed. A warning appeared. Emergency failure sequence activated. The room went silent. Caleb stopped. Vivian looked at him. What does that mean? Caleb stared at the message. His expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Recognition. Because this was not just a mistake. It was not just a hidden modification. Someone had prepared for this moment. Someone wanted the system to fail. And now Caleb Whitmore knew the truth they had been hiding. The problem was never the machine. The problem was the person behind it. The truth does not always arrive with a loud voice. Sometimes it appears quietly on a screen, waiting for the right person to finally see it. The emergency warning continued flashing. Red letters reflected across Caleb Whitmore's face. The room that had once been filled with confidence was now filled with uncertainty. Because everyone understood the same thing. This was not an accident. Someone had planned for the system to fail. Vivian Hawthorne stared at the warning message. Can you stop it? Caleb did not answer immediately. His eyes moved through the data. Every line, every sequence, every hidden command. He was searching for the reason behind the failure, not just the solution. Because machines did not betray people. People did. Caleb, Vivian asked again. He finally looked up. Yes. A moment of relief passed through the room. Then Caleb continued. But first, I need to know who activated this. The room became still. Because everyone knew what that meant. Someone inside Hawthorne Dynamics was responsible. Someone with access. Someone trusted. Marcus Vale stepped backward. Only slightly. But enough. Vivian noticed. And this time, she did not ignore what was right in front of her. Marcus, she said. His expression hardened. Vivian, this is not the time for accusations. No, her voice became stronger. This is exactly the time. The CEO who once controlled every conversation was now asking questions she should have asked years ago. Caleb continued working. His fingers moved across the keyboard. The countdown continued. 20 minutes. 19. 18. Every second reminded them that pride had consequences. Then Caleb found something. A hidden access point. A private authorization key. A signature buried deep inside the system. Vivian leaned closer. Whose name is that? Caleb looked at the screen. His expression became serious. It's not a name. A pause. It's a company account. The room shifted. Because that meant something different. This was not one person acting alone. Someone had used the company itself as a shield. Marcus quickly spoke. We should focus on shutting this down, not searching for blame. Caleb looked at him. And for a second, the entire room understood. The man Marcus called a nobody was the only person who truly understood what was happening. You're right, Caleb said. Everyone looked surprised. Marcus relaxed slightly. Then Caleb continued. We should fix the problem first. A silence followed. Because Caleb had every reason to destroy the people who hurt him. He had proof. He had power. He had the moment everyone expected him to take. But he chose something else. Responsibility. Vivian watched him carefully. Years of leadership had taught her how to recognize intelligence. But Caleb showed her something different. Wisdom. The kind that came from pain. The kind that came from losing everything and still choosing kindness. Why? Vivian whispered. Caleb looked at her. Why what? Why are you helping us? The question stayed in the air. Because everyone knew he had been wronged. He had been forgotten. His name had been removed. His work had been taken. Caleb looked at the screen, then at the people around him. Because customers don't deserve to suffer because we failed. Not because he wanted revenge. Not because he wanted applause. Because it was the right thing to do. The countdown reached 10 minutes. The team moved faster. Engineers followed Caleb's instructions. Executives listened instead of commanding. For the first time, Hawthorne Dynamics was not being led by a title. It was being guided by character. Then Caleb noticed something hidden beneath the emergency code. A final message. A message left by the person who created the failure sequence. He opened it. The screen displayed a single sentence. And when Caleb read it, his face changed. Because the person behind the attack was not a stranger. It was someone connected to the beginning of everything. Someone who knew Caleb. Someone who knew his work. Someone who knew exactly how to destroy the legacy he had tried to leave behind. And now, the truth was finally coming home. The hardest truth to accept is not discovering that someone betrayed you. It is discovering that the person you trusted never truly saw your value. The message remained on the screen. A single sentence. A name hidden behind years of secrets. Caleb Whitmore stared at the data, and for a moment, the noise of the room disappeared. The countdown continued. The system continued failing. But Caleb was no longer looking at the machine. He was looking at the past. Because the person behind the attack was someone who knew him. Someone who knew his ideas. Someone who knew exactly where to hurt him. Vivian noticed the change in his expression. Caleb, her voice was careful. What did you find? Caleb slowly stepped away from the screen. It was someone from the original development team. The room became silent. The person who changed the system had access years ago. Marcus Vale looked uncomfortable. Who? Caleb looked at the name. Then he answered. Elliot Voss. A few executives exchanged confused looks. But Vivian's expression changed. Because she recognized the name. Elliot, she whispered. Years ago, Elliot Voss was one of the first executives who supported Hawthorne Dynamics. A brilliant strategist. A respected leader. A person everyone trusted. But behind every successful company are stories that never make it into public announcements. Stories of ambition. Stories of choices. Stories of people who believe they deserve the credit more than anyone else. Caleb remembered Elliot differently. Not as a villain. Not as a monster. But as someone who once stood beside him. Someone who once called him a friend. Years earlier, when Caleb created the original system, Elliot was there. He watched the late nights. He watched the impossible problems get solved. He watched Caleb sacrifice everything for the invention. But somewhere along the way, admiration became jealousy. Respect became competition. And friendship became a battle for recognition. He wanted my name removed, Caleb said quietly. Vivian looked at him. Why? Caleb looked down. Because he believed the world would remember the person who presented the idea. A pause. Not the person who created it. The words carried more pain than anger. And Vivian finally understood. Caleb was not only fighting a corporate battle. He was fighting the pain of being forgotten. The system warning flashed again. 10 minutes remained. Vivian turned toward the team. Find Elliot. Executives moved quickly. But Caleb stayed focused on the repair. Because even after everything, he still chose to save what others tried to destroy. Vivian watched him work. The man she had insulted. The man she had underestimated. The man who had every reason to walk away. And suddenly, she understood something that changed her forever. Caleb's greatest achievement was not the technology. It was the person he became after losing everything. A weaker man would have used this moment to make everyone suffer. A proud man would have demanded recognition. But Caleb only wanted to prevent innocent people from being hurt. That was the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Between success and greatness. Between power and character. Caleb, Vivian said softly. He looked at her. I owe you an apology. For the first time, the CEO of Hawthorne Dynamics admitted something she rarely admitted. She was wrong. Caleb gave a small nod. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just understanding. Because redemption does not happen in one sentence. It happens through actions. The countdown reached 5 minutes. Caleb entered the final command. The screens changed. The failure sequence began slowing. Everyone watched. Nobody spoke. Then the system stabilized. A quiet sound filled the room. The warning disappeared. The danger was gone. But before anyone could celebrate, another notification appeared. A hidden file had been unlocked. A file Caleb had never seen before. Vivian moved closer. What is that? Caleb opened it. The screen revealed a document created years ago. A document containing the original ownership agreement. And at the bottom was something that made everyone freeze. Not just Caleb's name. Not just his signature. But proof that his entire legacy had been taken from him. The truth was finally visible. And this time, the world would have to listen. The greatest victory is not when the world finally remembers your name. It is when you can stand before the people who forgot you and still choose kindness. The document remained open on the screen. For years, Caleb Whitmore's name had been buried beneath someone else's success. For years, his creation had carried another person's reputation. But now the truth was impossible to hide. Original creator. Original designer. Original owner. The evidence was there. Not hidden. Not forgotten. Not anymore. The room stayed silent as Vivian Hawthorne read every line of the agreement. She had built her entire career believing she understood success. She believed success came from confidence, from control, from being the person everyone recognized. But standing there beside Caleb, she realized something she had never learned from any business book. A person's value does not disappear just because the world refuses to see it. Caleb, her voice was almost a whisper. I'm sorry. Those two words were simple. But for someone like Vivian Hawthorne, they carried enormous weight. Because powerful people are often surrounded by people who agree with them. Very few people are brave enough to tell them when they are wrong. Caleb looked at her. The same woman who had looked down on him hours earlier. The same woman who had judged his clothes before understanding his story. The same woman who had called him a moron. But he did not see an enemy. He saw someone who finally understood. I should have listened, Vivian continued. Caleb remained quiet. Not because he wanted her to suffer. Because some wounds do not heal through words. They heal through change. The investigation began immediately. The hidden files were released. The original documents were verified. The company's board could no longer ignore the truth. Elliot Voss had manipulated records years earlier, removing Caleb's name and presenting the invention as a collective corporate achievement. He wanted recognition. He wanted power. He wanted the world to remember him. But in chasing a legacy, he destroyed his own. Because a legacy built on deception never survives the moment truth arrives. The following weeks were difficult for Hawthorne Dynamics. There were meetings, questions, public statements, hard conversations. But for the first time in years, the company stopped protecting its image. It started protecting its integrity. And Caleb Whitmore? He returned home every evening to the same small house. The same kitchen. The same quiet moments with his daughter. One evening, Lily looked at him while he prepared dinner. Daddy, are you famous now? Caleb smiled. No, she tilted her head. But everyone knows your name. Caleb looked at her. Then he smiled gently. Being known is not the same as being important. Lily thought about that. Then she hugged him. And in that moment, Caleb realized something. He had never lost what mattered most. Because while the world forgot his name, his daughter never forgot his heart. Months later, Hawthorne Dynamics held a special announcement. Not a product launch. Not a celebration of profits. A celebration of truth. Vivian stood on the stage. Thousands watched. She could have taken credit for saving the company. She could have focused on the future. Instead, she did something unexpected. She invited Caleb Whitmore forward. The room became quiet. The same kind of silence from that first conference room. But this time, it was different. Not the silence of judgment. Not the silence of doubt. The silence of respect. Vivian handed him the microphone. Caleb looked across the audience. A year ago, nobody would have noticed him. Today, everyone was listening. But he did not speak about revenge. He did not speak about what was stolen. He simply said, technology can change the world. A pause. But character decides whether that change is used for good. The room remained still. Because everyone understood. The man they underestimated was never searching for a chance to become powerful. He was searching for a chance to do what was right. And that was why Caleb Whitmore became unforgettable. Not because his name appeared on a manual. Not because the world finally discovered his genius. But because when he had every reason to become bitter, he chose grace. He chose dignity. He chose kindness. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one whose actions create the loudest echo.